going. Thank you, Kira. Please keep your mic muted during a large group portion. Towards the end, if you do have a question and want to unmute and are able, we might be able to accommodate that towards the end. There are 3 ways to interact with the meeting while we are presenting. Feel free to chime in the chat. We love to kind of see you engaged and asking questions as we're going. It helps us know what you're needing from us. And you can also use reactions at the bottom of the screen, thumbs up, hands clapping, all of that, and polling. I'm not sure if Kira and Stacy have any polling questions prepared for you, but that is another way we might ask to hear from you while we are talking with you this afternoon. We also have a Padlet link that I will share with you as we get started. All of the resources mentioned today, as well as a recording, will be housed there. I'm also going to upload my slides from yesterday there for you and have several Padlet links there too. So anything mentioned today, you should be able to access using this Padlet link. And then thank you so much for your thoughtful feedback yesterday. We are going to share another feedback form with you this afternoon, and that is how you are going to receive your PD certificate for today's session. And then I will have one other Google form for you that you will complete with your mailing address so that you can receive your stipend for attending both of these sessions. So I'll share that in a chat as well as send it in an email after the session. All right, unless there's any questions before we get started, I'm going to turn things over to MTSU.
Great, thank you so much, Nikki. So let me pull up our PowerPoint here. So good afternoon. I'm Kira Duke. I was with you guys yesterday. I am joined today by my colleague, Dr. Stacy Graham, with our Teaching with Primary Sources program here at MTSU. So our focus today is on determining significance in history with primary source analysis. So we're going to look at that. But before we do that, I want to, if you go use your thumbs up, how many of you guys are new to teaching with primary sources? You have not been in one of our sessions before or unfamiliar with our program? So it looks like most of you are familiar.
Couple? Yeah, a couple that are new. Yay.
All right. So, so for those of you who are new, we are funded through the Library of Congress and are part of a national consortium. Our focus is really thinking about, again, how we use primary sources in the classroom and really promoting the use of Library of Congress primary sources specifically. And we do that through both creation of various educational materials, which we will show you guys later on, as well as through different professional development events, of course, like what we're doing today, as well as in-person events too. We've been doing this since 2008, so for quite a while now, and so have been all across the state doing things over the years. Of course, in the last few years here, have offered a lot more in the way of webinars and virtual programming. And I've enjoyed that, but we're also enjoying, of course, getting back out into different communities across the state and doing in-person workshops. Everything we do is free. We also, of course, connect all of our events and our materials to Tennessee state curriculum standards. So know that any of the materials and things that we do, we definitely are looking at what is required in the classrooms here in our state. And so you know that we can, of course, are taking that into account. So with that in mind, we're going to, again, take a look at understanding significance and thinking about, again, how we can use that, especially, again, as it relates, of course, to the History Day project. So this is going to be a kind of an exercise in how you might break this down for students. All right.
Okay. So first of all, Kira and I wanted to define what historical significance was in a way that maybe your students will be able to grasp and incorporate. We found a couple definitions in a couple places that we generally use as references. And so here's one that we liked from the Historical Thinking Project, whose website is linked to from this PowerPoint slide, by the way. So significance depends upon one's perspective and purpose. A historical person or event can acquire significance if we, the historians, can link it to larger trends and stories that reveal something important for us today. And one thing I like about that is the idea of linking to larger trends, because in a lot of the materials that we create, we try to take local stories and tie them to national currents. And that's a really great way to see just how things in Tennessee play out and affect and impact the national stage and are impacted by national events, especially when it comes to things like the Civil War, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and things like that. And so it's a really great way for your students to pick a local topic, but the whole idea of tying it to a larger trend is a way of finding historical significance, and that will help them then be able to cover that aspect of the project when they're explaining it to the judges. So next slide, please. So continuing this definition of what significance is, obviously there's a lot more ways to kind of articulate a definition for this. So how would you define it? And of course, there's, a difference between long-term significance versus short-term significance. What information do you need to determine this? And what other historical thinking skills are used to determine significance? I'm wondering if any of you can answer any of these questions, or add to maybe some of the questions we ought to be thinking about in order to determine what significance is. Like, how do you explain it to your students? If you want, you can drop something in the chat box, or
So to kind of kick off our conversation while you guys are thinking about kind of how you want to respond to this in the chat box, when we think about what information that we need, I was looking at a chapter that I know Stacy uses in her History 3011 class that's in Why Won't You Just Give Us the Answers? It's the Bruce Letch book. And one of the things he talks about, of course, is context and the importance of context. And of course, we know yesterday, of course, we heard Nikki talking about context being a core portion of a History Day project. But if we're going to think about significance, we definitely need to have a good grasp of the larger context of the question and, of course, the time period that we're looking at.
Okay, I know this is a tough one, and we're gonna keep talking about it for another few more slides, and then we'll have a little example as well. I know that when we are working on projects with the Center for Historic Preservation, and sometimes we work with National Register properties, and of course you have to determine significance in order for something to get nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. And so they have different criteria that they use. And there's local significance, state significance, and national significance. So that might be another way to break it down for your students, as well as like the short term versus long term. Oh yeah, and I see that's what Sharon has said. Start with the state or local event, and then tie it in to that national event. Think of it like kind of concentric circles. What is the impact that kind of goes out? And then how long after the event do you look to see what the impact or the legacy is? The Civil War, obviously, that legacy we're still living today. So that impact is pretty incalculable. But I don't think anybody would argue that the Civil War was not significant. So sometimes there's no discussion over the significance of an event, but when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, when did this start? We're gonna explore that question a little bit further. So any idea about like historical thinking skills used to determine? Now, contextualization, of course, being one that Kira mentioned. And then, of course, if you're looking at kind of long-term impacts, you can talk about change and continuity over time, which is another one of those social studies practices 0.05 bullet point standards. And also the way that historians keep grappling with a subject. If it's a subject that historians feel like they keep needing to reinterpret every 10 years or so, that's a really good clue about the significance, because we're still trying to figure out how it has played out in our national kind of, story. So
Yep.
I'm
One
sorry.
other thing I would add to that too, if we're thinking about significance, we're probably going to need to look at multiple sources. So being able to, find those multiple sources to be able to pick out the important information, and then actually begin to synthesize all of that information into the kind of the key points. That's also going to be an important skill for us.
Oh yeah, that's SSP 01, 2, and 3. And we're going to get to 04 in a second. Can you move to the next slide?
Yeah.
All right. I know Kira already mentioned the Bruce Lesh book. Why won't you just tell us the answer? It's a book that I use when I teaching historical thinking every fall at MTSU. And he has a chapter where he talks about historical significance and how he conveys it to students. And so he starts with this, this set of criteria, which you can see on the left there, which he has gotten from an educator named Levesque. It's actually the Levesque Partington Martin criteria. So it's a group of educational scholars who have kind of come up with these criteria for determining historical significance. But words like importance, profundity, quantity, durability, and relevance may not immediately translate in your students' brains to, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And so Bruce Lesh rewrote those. So on the right, after the arrows, you can see kind of how he translates that for students. And so this is just one suggested model that might be helpful for you. So in other words, visibility, so that's how often do you see this in history books? How often do you see this on historical markers? How often do you read about this in, publications like the Smithsonian Magazine or other kinds of things? People are always like, oh, I heard of that somewhere. I heard about this, but they don't remember where, but that indicates high visibility. And then profundity, basically what he means by that is how many people are affected. Is this something that just happened to one small town, or is this something that happened to, the entire Italian American population on the Eastern Seaboard in the 1880s, for example? That there is no, of course, cutoff number of, well, this is not significant, this is significant, but it's still something to consider. Excuse me. And then by quantity, Bruce Lesh translates that as how many laws, policies, or precedents were generated from this event or movement. So this really speaks to impact in a way that's codified into our system. So does this result in a Supreme Court precedent, like the 14th Amendment? Did this result in a new set of laws that, like the Clean Air Act or the New Deal? And those things tend to have a wider impact because they can be the state and the federal story there. And for durability, how long it lasts. Now, it might not last in the same form throughout the years. Obviously, the Civil War stopped being a military engagement after 4 years, but then the legacy of the Civil War in terms of memorialization in the landscape and race relations, and all the different laws coming out of Reconstruction, that counts in terms of the durability of the impact that had. And then relevance, again, is this something that you've heard of? Is this something that the government was involved in? Did Eisenhower send National Guard troops? Is this something that may have happened in just one location, but obviously pertained to people who were living in other places. And then, of course, how relevant is it to us today as well? Is this something that still kind of affects us? Is it a law that still allows us to do things that we may or may not be taking for granted right now? So all these different things are just a way to articulate certain criteria that might help get that question across to your students. Right, no need to copy these down. We'll provide the slides to you. But yeah, I like that that we have people already kind of starting with these state and local stories, and then moving broader than that to kind of larger impact. Well, if no one has anything to add to this or any other considerations, I know it's a lot to kind of process all at once. We can go to the next slide.
All right, so we thought for our example here, so we've kind of talked about kind of some different ways to approach thinking about historical significance. So we wanted to kind of walk you guys through an example. So we thought we would start with a historical question. And as we were looking for kind of, what sources we might want to use, what question do we want to explore for this activity, we stumbled upon one of our old lesson plans that we did that explores the ways that American citizenship it changed between 1865 and 1965. And so we thought that this lesson plan and some of the materials that we used in it might make for a good place to, again, walk through this question of significance with you guys. So we're going to start with this question again. How did the meaning of American citizenship evolve between 1865 and 1965? So we're going to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. And our historical claim that we're going to explore is that the ratification of the 14th Amendment drastically altered how American citizenship was defined and kicked off a century of struggles to further expand and live up to the promise of a broader definition of American citizenship that was not limited to gender, race, or ethnicity. So again, we're going to look at some events and think about their significance in helping us to prove that claim that, again, that the 14th Amendment is kind of the starting point that launches a century of struggle to live up to this idea of a broader understanding of American citizenship that is not limited due to race, ethnicity, or gender. So again, one of the things we talked about already that you need to begin to, or in order to understand significance, is context. And again, one of the reasons that we thought we would use this as our example is that this particular lesson plan has this very kind of interesting timeline, visual timeline piece that we put together. So we thought it would make for, again, kind of a good place for us to start this discussion. So when we think about, again, context, for this, I think that we want to also, again, we would want to remind students that, before we get to the 14th Amendment, we need to have established what, how do we define citizenship prior to the 14th, so that we can begin to, again, think about why that's significant in launching this century of kind of expansion of our understanding of what citizenship is. So again, prior to the 14th Amendment, American citizenship, was limited primarily to, to men, white men who could vote. Of course, we had expanded that during the Jackson era so that it wasn't just propertied men, but that beyond that, the scope of citizenship, especially when we think about voting rights and those kind of things, was again very much limited to white men. So that when we get to, of course, to the passage of the 14th, where we are first defining what it is to have a national citizenship for the first time in anything that's actually written into law, that we have now said that it is, we're expanding it to anyone who is a natural born citizen, and of course, including within that women and African Americans, which had not been included before. They do, of course, make the exception there in the 14th Amendment for Native Americans who, of course, still claimed their tribal allegiance. So that is again how we start this question of significance. So then you'll see again what we have done here is we have tried to establish again this century of change. And you'll note that we have divided this into three main categories. So you'll see the red boxes are events tied to history of African Americans in the country. The green boxes are tied to major events dealing with Native Americans. And then the blue boxes are events tied to women. So as you look through here, and it may be a little difficult to read the language on the screen to read some of the text, and we can drop the link for you in the box if that's a challenge. I think Stacy can find that for you and drop that in the box. What are some things that kind of stand out to you all? So again, in the chat box, if you want to be thinking about, again, what are some things on this timeline that really kind of stand out, whether it be a single event or a trend. I know for myself, when I think about kind of the significance of this period, I think about it as kind of an ebb and flow. And so, we will see listed here within the events that there is these moments where we are gaining ground in how we are defining citizenship, and then there are moments where there is kind of a backward movement and kind of a regression, and so that is kind of an ebb and flow that we see for all three groups. But that by the time we get to the 1960s, we are seeing definitely an expansion of that understanding of citizenship.
Okay, we have some comments coming in. Okay, so the visual nature of this timeline does give the impression that it's more of a progression rather than those fits and starts. For one thing, that's for us to consider. Now there's somebody noticed that for the period from 1915 to 1925, you see all three colors really active during that decade. And then some people just focused on like certain colors. So seeing a lot of the reds talking about African American citizenship, and how that's actually a really good way to organize this.
Seeing trends in language around how events are described, like riot versus massacre.
So some other trends that you might pick up on when we think about, again, how do we define significance when we're thinking about how we talk about citizenship? Education. We could think about military service and how that's pictured here. We could also thinking about voting and civic responsibility, because all three of those also kind of show up within the different groups at different points on the timeline. So we're going to come back and look at this again in a little bit, but what we want to do before we kind of get into that is we're going to look at a new tool that we actually, that Stacy created for us for this activity.
Okay, I like graphic organizers because I like to pretend that I'm organized. And also it gives your students something to be looking at and writing on, which sometimes is just what they need to get some of those juices flowing. And of course, it helps with assessment and note-taking and things like that. So we've come up with this 2 pages or a front and back graphic organizer. You're looking at the front page right now, where we're using that timeline again. And like Kira said, we'll go back to it. And we are zooming in on 3 specific sources out of the whole timeline. So in other words, the timeline is the context for 3 specific primary sources that we're going to take a closer look at. And I know you can't see them very well on this worksheet just yet. We're going to take a closer look at them in just a minute. But you can see that we have picked from each of the different colored strands about African-American citizenship, women's citizenship, and Native American citizenship. So that's what the 3 columns are referring to. And so on the worksheet, you can see a few links. It links to the timeline. So obviously that's not all that helpful if you print this out and give it to students in a hard copy. But when you're downloading these materials from the internet, that's very helpful in that way. And then of course the hyperlinks below or next to the primary sources is where you can find them on the Library of Congress website or the National Archives, which is what the last image is. It's taken from the National Archives website instead. So what students are supposed to be doing on this page 1 is examining each source in turn and then using the box beneath it to talk about why that particular source represents something significant. And the hope is that they'll use the larger timeline as a context, because like Kira said, you need the context in order to determine significance, to see, okay, well, what does this come after? What does it actually lead into? Is this something that people have been fighting for a very long time? Or is this something that kind of comes up all of a sudden, but has a really big impact in terms of how things can change after it? So let's take a closer look at each of these 3, starting with this one, the first colored senator and representatives. This image is from 1872. Sorry, I had to go back to the worksheet for a second. And it's talking about the US Congress and not individual state legislatures, because there were state reps and state senators before 1872 even. But if you take a look at this one, how do you think this represents something significant?
So for me, when I think about this image, and one of the reasons that I picked this one is if we think about, just, 10 years prior to this, that, African Americans were, majority were enslaved. We had the Dred Scott decision as the law of the land that said that they were not citizens. And so we see that really in that short span of time between the end of the Civil War and when this source from, which 1872, that we have, granted African Americans the right of citizenship. We've also given African men, the right to vote, and that we've now used that right to vote to become representatives in our democratic government. And so to really be able to go from, this kind of drastic change, to me, this shows, again, real significance, and again, how we are redefining and changing what it means to be a citizen in this country. This is just kind of, again, a drastic change that happens in a fairly short period of time.
And also look at how these gentlemen are depicted in this image. How has that changed in terms of the depictions of African Americans at this time period?
Yeah, and of course, any images from this time period, I always love the hairstyles, facial hairstyles especially. So yeah, so that you could compare this to other imagery from the time period too. Again, how this is changing again our visual vocabulary from the time, and again, I'm just changing our understanding. So again, this is, to me, really speaks to the significance of the changes of that Reconstruction period.
Yeah, and Kara pointed out that this shows affluence, which is something that a lot of African Americans, maybe not a lot, but a lot more African Americans were able to finally achieve in this time period through pursuit of middle class, education, making it possible for them to pursue middle class and upper class jobs, like making it all the way to the US Congress. And that shows the support of, not just a lot of African Americans in their districts, but also perhaps some white Americans too, maybe for the first time voting for an African American candidate, which is obviously something that you have to guess at, but something that has never happened before, which can also be a way to determine significance. So because their coats, and their slick hairstyles, all kind of, and the way that they're sitting down and in very dignified poses. So we have a presentation of African Americans in a way that's new. This is true. The codes don't necessarily indicate affluence. I think is one of the clues, though, your students would point to and add it to the other factors. And they could even do research into one of these and find out, well, what was their job before they became an elected representative, and see what classes do these people come from? And how did they get to that point in their lives? And what is the role of the African American community and the power base that they have built within these communities in getting them there? And it's not just generic faces either. You can tell these are very specifically people, individuals here. So the artist would have based this on these specific people. And of course, the names you can't read from the slide right now, but if you go to the website and download the TIFF file, you'll be able to get the names of all of the people on here. There are actually lots of details in here. I kind of like the way the artist stops drawing when he gets towards the bottom. So you can tell he had a rough outline and then he fills it in with the individual faces when he finally gets these people. I don't know if he got them all together or if he had to do them individually. But I would say that if these are the first of anything might seem significant. I know we're always pointing to firsts in American history as if that means it's somehow more significant. But there is something to be said about changing people's attitudes and just expressing new possibilities and capabilities. So going back to what Kira had said about the ebbs and flows, though, when you look at this, you might think, oh, wow, there are a lot of African American, representatives in US Congress in 1872. I bet that number just gets, bigger from here on out. And we know that's not the case. So then the question is, well, how significant is it if there's such a setback that we don't have hardly any African American, senators or US representatives for decades after this point? So that's something to consider too. How long do we have to wait before we get this number back up again? And if I were thinking, I would have looked up how many people of color we currently have in the US Congress, but I don't have that number off the top of my head. But I'm sure those statistics are easily Googleable. Pardon me for that unfortunate word. So any other thoughts about how you can use this to argue the significance of the first colored or the first African-American senators and representatives of US Congress?
So let's go ahead and move on to our next source here. So this one is a flyer that we see from the National American Women's Suffrage Association. The title of it being Why Women Want to Vote, Women Are Citizens and Wish to Do Their Civic Duty. So, some lines that, might jump out at you if you get a chance to read these. Of course, the first part of it starting with statements about, female roles. So whether that be working women or housekeepers or mothers or teachers, throwing out these questions. So for example, with mothers need the ballot to regulate the moral conditions under which their children must be brought up. Do men think that they can vote against vicious conditions that are threatening their children unless they can vote for the men that run the district? So you'll see that again, all of these kind of first examples list concerns that women have, and then counterbalance or kind of juxtapose that to these questions of well, wouldn't men want to have a vote in picking the people who have a say in this issue? And then kind of ends with these statements talking about, tax-paying women need the ballot to protect their property. All women need the ballot because they are concerned equally with men in good and bad government and equally responsible for civic righteousness. All men and women's help to build a better and juster government, and women and men to help them secure their right to fulfill their civic duty. So the date on this document is 1910, which of course we know is about 10 years prior to the 19th Amendment. And again, that context frame of things, we know that this is of course still in that period of time when women's suffrage activists are advocating to get the right to vote. Nationwide, we know, of course, we will be able to see on the timeline that there were women in certain states that did have a limited right to the ballot. But again, this is about the national right to vote. So what is significant about this? How does it speak to that larger significance of, women and their request to be full citizens?
Well, for one thing, it shows the emergence of different organizations to formally lobby for the right to vote, like the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which is going to be really instrumental. And also, this shows you the continuation of this fight. True. Teachers are not grouped with working women. Well, yeah, it is an interesting comment on the times. So our question is, how is this? Well, I'm sorry, how did you word it, Kira?
Yeah, how this is significant to that larger quest of how women receiving full citizenship.
Right. So why would students pick out this primary source to use in their History Day projects and not something else?
So one thing that I might point to is that I don't think that it is, this document in particular is drastically significant, but I do think it's interesting and speaks to the significance of the argument that they were making at the time, how it talks about wanting to fulfill civic duty. Like that language I find very interesting. I also think that, again, this claim, again, of how they're making their argument about, again, the taxation without representation piece there in the tax-paying women line. And then also, again, that this need for the ballot so that they can have a say in, again, creating in their civic responsibilities. I think that's just really, that's a very interesting piece, again, that gets to the significance of the arguments that they were making at the time.
Right, in this sense that women already felt like they had a very good conception of what their civic duty was. They were just asking for permission to actually do it. And the Library of Congress has an entire collection of items from the National American Women's Suffrage Association, including accompanying essays and other kinds of resources that can provide a lot more context about this particular association and the time period in which they developed and what they were able to achieve and or not, and how they went about doing what they did, how they chose to lobby, and how they chose to get at and be persuasive to get at this issue. And so, you know, flyers are something that they used to great effect. And so it'd be the kind of same thing as making a really good meme today, right? And passing it around on Twitter or Facebook. If you need to create an analogy for your students, to reach a wide audience. And they were able to do that through these larger kind of networks, through these political organizations, basically.
So I think your point there about, again, you know, comparing the, you know, the tactics that they were using and looking at maybe the significance of the organizations to address that question. I think that, you know, we could use that to talk about the significance of, you know, this particular source again, because, you know, they aren't, you know, they're making very non-threatening arguments, right? Especially if we want to kind of juxtapose this with some of the more militant groups within the women's suffrage organization who are making much more kind of confrontational arguments for why women deserve the right to vote. And so, you know, the significance of that, how did that tactic work as opposed to some of the others? Why did they choose that tactic? You know, I think that is a very interesting question when we think about significance of this particular source. All right, so any other kind of questions here? I think, I notice our time, we probably need to move ahead a little bit. Time's getting away from us. So our final source we wanted to look at, of course, was this image. Stacey, do you want to introduce it or?
Well, first I want to throw it out to you all and ask you if you know what this image is portraying. Yes, Sharon, these are code talkers. And so, yes, you can have your students start off with, what do you see? 2 soldiers or 2 men with soldiers' garb and weapons. One of them is writing a note. But yes, these are Native American code talkers, and that is something that occurs famously during World War II. And that's what this image is. There's a Who Was book about them. My daughter loves the Who Was show, I just have to say. But yeah, that's great. Well, that means that maybe your students will be familiar with them from a young age. I know that there's a movie about this, and there's several websites, and I've actually judged several past History Day projects on this topic. It's of eternal interest. Yep. And because it's fascinating, because code breaking is something that appeals to people who like, you know, espionage and puzzles and strategy. And it also speaks to some of the uniqueness of Native American culture, that there was a language that the Germans could not figure out this code because they were not familiar with the structure of this language at all. And that was the Navajo language. And so that talks about, you know, that speaks to the significance of the Navajo for maintaining an oral culture this long, that there were enough of them to be able to participate and do this, and that they felt enough patriotism to join the war effort and contribute their culture to the American victory. So when you're talking about Native American citizenship, which technically was granted, was it 1924?
Gives in the 20s.
Yeah, so the Native American Citizenship Act was not until the 1920s. So after white women and ostensibly Black women, but not really in reality, were allowed to vote, then Native American men could. In this long story of people getting the right to vote, but incrementally and in law versus in actual practice, that has happened already 2 decades before you get to World War II. But still, what is the status of Native American citizenship during World War II that that this particular story of the code talkers that makes that significant? And especially when you look at the way that some minorities were treated during World War II, like Asian Americans, African Americans, all fighting for the Allied war effort, but being treated very differently back at home. So this is a contribution that speaks to the sense of citizenship and participation, and also goes back to what Kira was saying about how military service is often a very prominent way for people to practice their citizenship and to prove their loyalty. It still is today. So yeah, any other thoughts about what kinds of points and arguments you could make using a primary source about the code talkers? Do we have a lot of Native Americans serving in the US military today? Do we have any code talkers who are still alive and sharing their stories? And actually, we have a newsletter that's coming out later this week on World War II, and one of the lesson ideas is about code talkers. So you can get a lot more links and resources and ideas by the end of this week if you're on our mailing list.
So again, in the interest of time, we're going to kind of jump ahead to kind of the last part of this, which I see you want to kind of introduce the back part of the graphic organizer.
Yes. Okay, so this is the page 2 of the graphic organizer, looking at the larger timeline, and of course that's hyperlinked again. So we are going to show you again the larger timeline on the next slide, but first I just want to explain kind of the layout of this organization here. So then we separate out the 3 different strands again, and you can also think of these all together if you feel like your students are ready to get that big of a picture at the end. But right now we keep it within these 3 interconnected and yet, you know, separated out by the colors timelines of African American citizenship, women's, and Native American citizenship. And so basically what this asks students to do is to look at the timeline and to pick 3 ideas or events that are on the timeline and tell you why they think those are significant to the larger struggle for citizenship on the part of that particular group. And what I like about this approach is students can pick any 3 examples that they want, but it's up to them to argue for the significance. And so this is where we talked about how determining historical significance really exercises a lot of historical thinking skills. So figuring out how to argue based on specific evidence from the text is one of those skills and something that all the History Day judges are going to be looking for. So they can really pick whichever ones they want, as long as they explain why it is significant. And so let's take a look at the timeline again. We'll drop that link back into the chat box so that you can bring it back up if you don't still have it on your computer screen, if you want to make it larger and read some of the text. So, you can pick any of the examples again that Kira, was asking before, which of these stand out to you, and how does it demonstrate significance to the struggle for citizenship, to the evolution of the idea of citizenship in the US?
So while you guys are looking at that, I want to bring your attention to just one thing, because it was something I learned when we were putting this together a few years ago. There around, let's see, I think it's between 1915 and 1920, you'll see there at the top, there is a little bitty text that it says transmitting messages in Choctaw. So actually in World War I, we were doing kind of a prototype to the Navajo code talkers, but with people who spoke Choctaw, which I thought was fascinating and I had never heard of before. So
yeah, I didn't know that either till I saw this timeline.
So yeah, just, cool little tidbits that you find along the way. So I know for me, again, kind of just, an example here, something that I would pick out to argue of its significance, there on the left-hand side, right there around the time of the 15th Amendment, there's that image below it of the women. Of course, this is getting at, women's response to being left out of the 15th Amendment. And of course, not being given the right to vote at that time, and the significance of that point, that event, and how that split, groups. It split people who had been working together to push for the right to vote for both women and for African American men. I think that is a very significant event that I would definitely put on my my graphic organizer.
And I would pick out the Double V campaign, where you can kind of see in the 1930s, should I sacrifice to live half American? At the top, there's a little newspaper headline talking about the Double V campaign, which means double victory, victory abroad versus victory at home. This refers to African-American servicemen who fought during World War II and then returned home to experience discrimination, and how the experience of having served their country in World War II really galvanized their sense of what they were owed as participating citizens back home in a civil rather than a military sense, in terms of our civil rights. We just fought for this country and then we're being treated this way back on our own home turf, and how that really impacted the movement and increased this kind of consciousness of African Americans as civic participants on a more national scale. They've gone and seen the world, and some of them were treated much better in places like France than they were back in their own home states. So very eye-opening for a lot of people.
So hopefully, again, this kind of gives you some ideas about how you might approach significance. So we want to just, as we kind of conclude this portion of the presentation, the activity, we want to go back and revisit these questions that we started out to begin with. How do we define significance, especially thinking long-term versus short-term? What information do we need to determine significance in our historical thinking skills? Which of those are we are needing to use? And then, the types of sources. So I think that for me, when I think about these questions, again, I think it's really important that students have a really good foundation in the context. And, with significance, this is why primary sources are important. Secondary sources are arguably even more important, again, to help them to provide that context and to understand, again, how, historians and others have argued significance of different events and moments.
Yeah, and in fact, in the chapter by Bruce Lesh about historical significance, he actually makes a point to say that this is where he kind of sets the primary sources aside for a little bit and has to have students read, kind of start with the secondary sources, and then when they kind of understand the larger narrative and start picking out points in that narrative that they think might demonstrate significance, researching those points to find the primary sources that really encapsulate those. So that's a backwards approach that might really help as well.
Yeah, and I think for, History Day especially, when you have students who are trying to either, pick a topic or figure out how to narrow down a very large topic, that this can be a really good way to help them to kind of figure that out. Again, starting with that secondary source information, and again, figuring out again what is significant about these points, and kind of narrowing things down until they get to a point where they really are ready to dive into the primary source material. But they need a very good background, before they can get ready to look at the primary sources.
And this is where timelines are so handy, because even though they oversimplify certain things, at least you can see what leads to what and how long it takes to get to certain places. So timeline's a good secondary source.
Yes,
Yeah,
I love a good timeline.
Sorry, to talk about timelines for a second, we often try to discourage kids from using them on their project themselves, but I think I really loved the way y'all laid that out, because I think that's really transferable. It's something that you could make into an activity with kids, and it also displays a diversity of sources. So you're kind of hitting a couple different things. They're practicing student voice as they're arguing the significance of the ones that they choose. And the sources that you used weren't just images, right? So getting kids to understand that diversity means lots of different types of primary sources. And when it comes to the History Day rubric, they have to consistently analyze the significance throughout the project. It's not something you can just dump on at the end. And I think that's helpful through that graphic organizing.
Something else that might help students in kind of going along with that is, if you take kind of, again, I'm just thinking about the process that we went through to create that timeline. You could actually have kids, create a timeline like that for their projects, because in a lot of ways, the timeline is just an outline. And so, having them create the outline, what are they featuring again in their project? What are the sources they want to put? And then having to kind of narrow down and create that outline gives them a good starting point to, again, kind of flesh things out for their actual project. All right, so any other thoughts about our questions here? We've got about 15 minutes, and we did want to spend just a few minutes again giving you guys a chance to ask us about places define sources. All right, so finding sources, that is the big question. Again, once students have selected their topic and they get into the research, how do they go about finding, especially the primary sources? So I think I'm going to stop sharing this screen for just a second and pull up. Hold on. So again, for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with our Teaching with Primary Sources program, or haven't had a chance to look at it in a while, we do, of course, have our own website, and Stacy will drop the link for our webpage there. We do have some things here that might be helpful for students as they are getting started. We have a whole collection of different primary source sets that you can see. We've got them divided by, again, kind of U.S. history topics. There are a few world history, some Tennessee specific ones, and then a couple arts and culture. And so these are kind of curated collections, curated searches of different materials that are out there and available. So again, if you had students had a topic that we had, a primary source set for, this is a good place to come and kind of, again, see a collection of things related to a topic and kind of get a place to get started. So primary source sets. you know, it's something that we have them, the Library of Congress has them on the teachers page. There are lots of other organizations that have kind of, you know, will pull together these kind of curated collections of materials. Let's see here, where I can back to my page. We also have under our tools for educators, some themed guides, and these can also be helpful for students. These are kind of extended kind of bibliographies to some extent, resource guides around different topics. We've done them in connection with different events that we've done in the past. And so some of these can also be useful for students. So for example, if you wanted to do one on the Cold War, here is a collection of, again, collections the Library of Congress has, exhibits, timelines, you know, different special features that they have, such as the America Stories section or Today in History. So again, things like this that again are going to point them in a direction that can help them find some different materials. And then of course, there's all kinds of things on here for you guys, including our analysis worksheets and graphic organizers. You'll see there. So there are, you know, different ones for historical thinking skills, like our HIPPO and our HAPPY analysis forms. The economic, social, and political organizers, again, helping them to kind of analyze it through those three lenses. Text, context, and subtext can be helpful, synthesizing sources. Again, lots of different ways to approach primary source analysis. And you can, again, feel free to make use of any of these. And they will definitely, again, challenge your students and, again, how they are approaching and analyzing primary sources from kind of different perspectives. So any questions about, you know, things that we might have available through our website, and then I'll touch on a few things that the Library of Congress might have.
Well, I did want to say, as I mentioned in the chat box, the graphic organizer we've shown you today is not on that tools page. We're still tweaking it before we post it. If you have any suggestions for how we can improve that, then please go ahead and pass them along to us. Obviously, right now in its iteration, it matches that one lesson plan, but we are thinking of ways to make it more general so that it can just be something you can use for other historical topics as well.
And we have, of course, added a link to the form as it exists now, is on that Padlet. And so, yeah, so here is the Padlet, and you can see, again, there's that graphic organizer, again, as it exists that we looked at it today, a link to the specific lesson plan that we pulled this from that has that timeline in it, a link to our website, and then I don't know why it showed me this screen right here where it says you have to log in, but the PowerPoint is linked here and you should have access to it. I don't know why Padlet was being weird. So you have access to all of those materials already here on the Padlet for you. All right, so let's talk about a few things that the Library of Congress has that can be helpful if you have students that are looking for sources. If you've been in any of the presentations that I've done here in the last few months, you might have noticed a theme, and that is that I have become obsessed with the Library of Congress resource guides. And so I want to show you those real quick. If I can spell. So this is, the library has recently made these where these are searchable. Get to where we can research guides. Okay, so you can access these by guides.loc.gov is how you get to where you can search for any and all of them. You can, and you'll see that it's loading because it takes a minute via the platform that they use to house all these in. So it'll show you by like subject index. So you can, just put in a search term here. So for example, let's see. Let's do Civil War and see what comes up. Sometimes it's really fascinating to see what they have for it. And No, I don't like that one. So let's try it again. Yeah, it's just sometimes I actually just come through here and search all guides and kind of see what they have or do it by subject area. So let's see here. We'll just click on history. So this is a look of all the ones they have for history. So let's see, we'll do the 19th Amendment. That connects to what we were talking to. So again, what these research guides have that, again, I really like, getting you to a little introduction that links you to some, again, core primary sources that the library has for the topic. You have digital collections. So that, again, are going to show you, again, what are some of the core collections they have that will connect to this. Sometimes within this, they will then kind of sublink you to like some key items within those collections, which I always particularly love. So for example, here we have with the historic newspapers where they've given us 5 different articles here that they've really highlighted. So again, a lot of times this can get us, and here's Theodore Roosevelt, and we've got, 2 highlights from that collection. So again, sometimes using these, I can find things that, it would have taken me a long time if I was just doing a general search. They have related online resources. So this is, again, other features within the library's collections and web pages that, again, will connect back, can be very helpful. And then the other thing that's just really good for research purposes, they list you some external websites, so places outside of the Library of Congress that have good materials. And this can also be very, very helpful. So these are definitely worth taking a look at if you have students as they start the process. And again, you can just do guides.loc.gov. You can do them by subject or all guides, or you can put in search terms. And so the search sometimes to me is a little wonky. But again, if you find one that is on a topic that you were looking for, it really is invaluable to getting you pointed in the right direction pretty quickly. So questions, anything you guys are kind of, challenges that you've had using the Library of Congress website or things that you're looking for? All right, well, again, as you guys work on your projects, different views.
That can, when you're looking at primary sources, sometimes they have at the bottom sources that are like this that sometimes you can use, but we recommend that if you're really looking for multiple perspectives, go within something that's already been structured, like one of the primary source sets. So I know we make a point when we create primary source sets, as does the Library of Congress on their teachers page, to not just have a diversity of types of sources in there, but a diversity of viewpoints on a particular topic also included. So that's so much easier and it saves time and headaches to people have already done all this work, so make use of that. And if a student wants to find this stuff themselves by searching Library of Congress website, I applaud their ambition, but a lot of stuff has already been pulled together with an eye for multiple perspectives, and so I would really take advantage of that.
Now, another place that I would also, if they're trying to search to find their own sources that are already pulled together for them, newspapers sometimes can be a really good place to find different perspectives featured, especially letters to the editor, opinion pages within papers. That is a great way to get at multiple perspectives because it's the whole nature of newspapers in here. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that. And of course, within the Library of Congress, they have Chronicling America. So again, depending on the date of the events that your students are exploring, that collection can be very helpful. If it's things that are, mid 20th century, I would say 1940s, early 50s forward, they're going to need to look elsewhere. That collection does not really go beyond the 40s. Or maybe there's a few things a little bit past that, but not very much. Any other questions?
There was a question about the National History Day guides.
We will let Nikki answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Karen, what guides you're referring to. So if you could clarify that for me, I can let you know.
They have some that they publish on their website. I found a couple of used ones. I think on the website, maybe it's $49, which I would not pay.
Oh,
But
okay.
it's like
You're
a teacher's
referring.
guide. Yeah, I'm not a history teacher. I do gifted education. And so I'm just trying to implement this as an opportunity for working on some gifted standards for my students. So
National History Day, actually working with the Library of Congress, just released a student guide, and it was in my newsletter last month. Let me find it for you. I can share that in the chat. It's free. It's online,
okay.
and I can put that in there. It's a research guide,
Sure.
and it's pretty helpful. So I can find that for you.
Awesome.
Otherwise, the books are several years old, so you know, take from that what you will.
Sure. Gotcha.
And I would also say, you know, as your students are doing their research, you know, depending on what secondary sources that they are looking at, you know, make sure to encourage them to look in the bibliographies of those books. What sources did those folks look at when they were writing those books? That can also be very helpful and kind of point them in a good direction.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Nikki, do you want to kind of again remind folks the procedure to kind of wrap things up here?
Yeah, of course. I'm trying to find this. Of course, it's going to be complicated for me to locate this link. I'm going to put the two forms that I need you guys to complete for this afternoon. One of them is feedback for Kira and Stacy on their presentation, and the other one is stipend information. Both of those, one of them gets you your certificate of participation, and the other gets that stipend sent to the address that you list there. And I placed the Padlet again a little bit earlier, but I will, let's see, copy it again here just for good measure and place it there for you. And, you know, feel free to look at, there's plenty of other content in there as well from past sessions that we've given. So it's just kind of a wealth of resources that you can come back to whenever you are able to. And I found what I was looking for. Here it is, research guide. And this is the one from NHD. Let me make sure that worked. I should have checked before I sent it to you. Yeah, that's their Library of Congress student guide as a PDF. It's a pretty big document, so spend some time looking through it. Of course, it talks through the History Day process, but it's written for students. So it is easy for you to share that directly with your kids without having to change any of the language over for them. And then for those of you that are in Middle Tennessee, I do want to remind you we have a session on September 10th in Clarksville. We have a little bit of low registration right now. So if you are close to that area and you know anybody that would benefit from coming to a full day workshop, we will feed you and come and kind of explore some topics with us. We have plenty of space. So if that's something you are interested in doing, I will put the registration link on the Padlet as well. And then I'm also going to be sending everybody that is here a copy of the guidebook, the hard copy of the guidebook for you. So it's all blurry. Well, anyway, there it is. So you'll be getting that to the address, your school address. I think that covers all of the things I need to share. I will be sending a recording as well. So you can refer to that later if you'd like. Otherwise, that's all I have.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time today. And of course, those of you joining us for 2 days, thank you for spending 2 afternoons with us this week. We hope to see you guys at a future workshop or webinar.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the session. Thank you guys, and we hope to see you in the future.